it's been a challenge that has changed the way that I cook and the way that I manage, and it's really forced me to relinquish control, which I think is a very difficult thing as an owner chef. You want control. You want control of heat. You want control of produce. You want control of dishes. So to relinquish that control has been quite hard, but it's actually made it a lot more enjoyable for me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. New Zealand has led the world in clamping down on COVID-19. With a forward-thinking leader and a society that has each other's backs, the intense original lockdowns has meant that life in New Zealand is back to normal, bar the occasional case. With a vibrant, energetic and exciting food landscape, what impact has this had on those plying their trade in the shaky isles? Nick Honeyman is the owner and head chef of Paris Butter in New Zealand and Le Petit Lion in France. Nick, how you going?
Really good, Huck. How you doing?
Good, mate. We can talk about what's sort of been going on over there in New Zealand, but I got wind of the fact that you're going to be jumping on a plane in 3 weeks when no one can sort of travel internationally really, and you're off to Paris.
Yeah, we're back to France, just outside of Bordeaux. We've got a little restaurant there, so it's a pretty daunting aspect. But before COVID, we've kind of set our lives up over 2 continents. And now we're trying our best to manage it, making decisions week by week, hoping that they're good decisions.
When did you make the call that you were definitely going back over there?
This one was actually a pretty easy call for us to make. My wife's pregnant with our second child, and she's German. So we actually have no family in New Zealand. And it was, I think COVID has taught us one thing that's really important is that family is important to us. So we felt that going to Europe during this time, we're going to get some family support. It was the natural path for us to take, and then we tried to set everything up around it.
You mentioned that you are a little bit nervous about it. How do you feel about sort of the cases and what's going on in Europe compared to the experience you've had in New Zealand now that you're almost on your way over there?
I think we're not so much nervous of COVID. It's more the businesses and how it's going to affect them. I'm pretty fortunate that in New Zealand I've got such an amazing team, and because it's been such a start-stop climate, we're pretty good at stopping the business on a dime when we need to. And the team is they've been with me for 4-5 years, so they're really good at running it. So it's given us the opportunity to go to Europe, and I mean I guess the worst case scenario for us is we go there and we can't open. It looks like that everything should open for summer, but we're just not sure.
Well, you mentioned summer as well, and it's a seasonal restaurant, which we don't see a lot of down in sort of Australia and New Zealand. And tell us a bit about the restaurant over there.
So Le Petit Lion, it's a seasonal restaurant. It's quite cool. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's in the region, the Dordogne region, which is an hour east of Bordeaux, in this tiny little country town. And it means that the rent is really cheap. So we can pay a full year's rent, and then we can afford to open the business however long we want.
Wow.
Which has led us, we've got this really unique blueprint, so we can hire a team and the team starts together and they finish together. And to be honest, it's the energy of that team and that family vibe. Everyone's there with the same goals and the same finishing date, so there's this light at the end of the tunnel. So it's this really surreal experience within a restaurant. Everyone's there not only to work, but they're also, they're on the same path. Whereas in a regular restaurant day to day, everybody is working in your restaurant, but everybody has different goals, and some might be aiming to finish in 6 months, some might want to do a couple of years.
Tell us a bit about the region and the produce and the sort of offering that you do.
So we do, it's fine dining food, and it's just inspired by the produce there. So the region there is really famous for for poultry, for ducks, foie gras, truffles. The history of that region, it's all embedded with food. You know, you drive down the road and on the left-hand side you've got walnut trees, and the right there's maize. There's just food everywhere. It's kind of a mecca for food.
How did it all come about? You've been chefing in New Zealand for quite a while now. What led to the France restaurant?
This was right place, right time. It all came about by accident. When I was working in Sydney, I was working for Haru Manukai, and he had worked with Pascal Barbot previously, and so he got me in the door to Pascal's restaurant L'Astrance in Paris. And when I arrived, Pascal said, don't really want to teach you how to cook, but you know, I really want to teach you the French culture. So he forced me to go to French school in the morning. And then he had a customer who had a little restaurant in the south of France, and he said, I think you should go there for 3 weeks to go and experience it. And that was Le Petit Lion. So more than 15 years ago, I went there and did a 2-week season or 3-week season to help the chef out. And I just stayed in contact with the team there and the guy who owned the land. And
wow.
5 years ago, he emailed me and said, I'm either going to sell it or you can come and do business with me. And it was kind of, you know, it was the opportunity of the lifetime. So I dropped everything and went. And then my wife and I, we ended up buying the restaurant 3 years ago.
Amazing. What's it been like trying to manage two restaurants that are so far apart?
Very challenging, but it's been a challenge that has changed the way that I cook and the way that I manage, and it's really forced me to relinquish control, which I think is a very difficult thing as an owner chef. You know, you want control. You want control of heat. You want control of produce. You want control of dishes. So to relinquish that control has been quite hard. But now that I've learned how to do it, I've got such amazing people working for me. You know, my head chef Zen, and he's just as good. He's probably a better chef than I am. And to learn how to give him more freedom and more control, it has just elevated the business, and it's actually made it a lot more enjoyable for me. I think that I find a lot of enjoyment cooking with people instead of just directing everybody the whole time.
Tell us about the time in New Zealand over the last year. You guys have been a real leading light and sort of clamping down on what everyone's going through across the world. What's it been like as an operator in New Zealand?
It's been pretty tough, but it's also been really good. You know, we still have this incredible lifestyle where some days you'll go and you won't feel the effect of anything. And then other days you really feel the pinch of the borders being shut and there's no tourists around. And especially in the high seasons in December when the tourists should be here, it's when everybody's kind of at 3/4 capacity instead of that December feeling where you're so busy. Yeah, it's a little bit eerie some days. And I think that around town that, you know, everybody's experienced that one drop-off day per week, and in hospitality, that's your profit gone. And sometimes you just can't pick that day anymore. 3 weeks ago we had a Friday night that was extremely quiet and we were full the rest of the week. And there was no reason for it other than it was just by chance that everybody else was eating at other restaurants.
You've been in New Zealand for quite a few years now. What led to the move to New Zealand?
I actually came to New Zealand for a weekend, and I came to visit a friend here, and he said, why don't you go and check out a couple of restaurants while you're here for the weekend? And I spoke to a guy, Simon Wright, who's at the French Cafe, and he said, do you want to start work on Monday? and that was it. I was just like, I enjoyed what he was doing, and I was like, why not? Let's give it a go. And it felt like a pretty chilled out, cool place to be. And then New Zealand just kind of opened its doors, and there's been this place of opportunity, and it's been really kind to me. You
have Paris Butter now. Tell us a bit about that restaurant and what you're doing.
So Paris Butter, in its current stage, we've been here for 5 years, and we do modern French food, kind of degustation based. I guess you could call it fine dining. It's hard to define food these days. Very much ingredient driven. So it's New Zealand ingredients and then I guess French techniques. We actually started off as a French bistro. I think last time I saw you, we were just about to open it, and I saw a gap in the market for this classic French bistro. 2 years into it, my wife turned around to me, said to me, why aren't you cooking food that you love? And I couldn't answer her. And I think the customers could feel it too. I would never want to go out to the floor, and it was solid food, but it wasn't ticking my creative boxes. So I wasn't completely proud about what we're doing. So we pretty much flipped it overnight, and we've been going there ever since.
Well, tell us about what you are doing now and what your style of cooking is.
So I guess our style of cooking is it's totally ingredient based, and it's always evolving. I really like to be creative, and I like to learn. So every week we're trying to do something new and to explore different ways to make food delicious. I think that's the key word for us, is we like to do delicious food, and then we like to take the ingredients that we find the best local ingredients and tell a story with them.
Tell us about New Zealand ingredients. What's some of the ingredients you love getting your hands on?
New Zealand food, it's incredible. They have some of the best ingredients in the world, from the waters. You have the snapper and the scampi and the crayfish, and then venison, lamb. The beef here is incredible too. We're really inundated with so much choice. If anything, COVID has been a positive effect on that, because there's been a lot more of that beautiful produce left in the country.
How does that compare to the sort of produce that you use in France?
The produce in France is exceptional. I think the difference with the produce in New Zealand and in France is that the produce in France is ready. A lot of the fruit that you can buy is ripe, and because the market's big enough. So in New Zealand, a lot of the problem you find is that things are not as ripe and they're not ready to eat. We don't have the same population to feed here, so you lose a lot of the local markets like you have in France. You don't have as many here, simply because a lot of the really good produce is exported. Where I guess in France, we can go down the road and the mushrooms they're local, the veg and produce is local. It's a little bit easier to source.
You were born in South Africa. Can you take us back to that time and when you started to get interested in food?
Yeah, I was born and raised in South Africa, and then when I was 18, I did what every other South African kid normally did, is you enroll to go to uni, and my parents saw that I wasn't super stoked to go from school to uni and do more studying. So they bought me a round the world ticket, and I started to backpack, and my first stop was in Perth, and I ended up landing a job as a kitchen hand. Never really knew anything about kitchens, and the first experience I had there was I was washing dishes on my second day, and all of a sudden the kitchen went dead, and this guy slammed through the back door after he had arrived in this red sports car. I was like, who the hell is this guy? And it was the head chef. And something stuck with me, and I was just like, I want to be that guy. And from then on, as an 18-year-old, you love food anyway, because you're just hungry all of the time. But I really started to appreciate it, and I liked the discipline and the hierarchy of a kitchen. It kind of, the old school apprenticeship set you goals, and it was just a solid ladder that you could climb. I think my personality just took to that. And so I went back to South Africa, and told my parents I was going to go move to Australia to start an apprenticeship, and that was that.
Take us through your time in Sydney with that apprenticeship and some of the really key restaurants that you worked in that sort of helped form who you are as a chef.
I think, the apprenticeship it didn't feel like the right thing at the time, but looking back on it, because you would go to work 5 days a week and then you go to school for one day. The day at school, you really felt like you weren't learning much, and it was only later down the track that you realised how important that was. And I managed to land myself in some cool places, and one of the most memorable was working with Haru and Ukai at Observatory Hotel, who'd been trained by Robuchon for so many years and had this incredible balance of Japanese and French flavours. And he was just this creative guy who was ran a nice tight kitchen, but he really looked after his staff. And I had the opportunity to go to Tokyo with him once and do a dinner with him, and then he also organised for me to go to France. It was I was really lucky with the mentors that I had.
You were locked down 5 days last week to do with COVID cases in Auckland. What sort of impact did that have?
Last week was probably the hardest for us. The previous lockdowns, when you had the full lockdown, people are starved of restaurants, and then you come out and we go from level 4 to level 3, and you can do the takeaway model, and people were really supportive of that. Last week, from going from normal life in summer to a level 3 lockdown, where it's a completely new business model for us. So doing takeaways means that we have to go back to, the classics, the food that travels well. And people just weren't starved of restaurants last week, so it was quite a slow business model. But also it's a really humbling one. We've been open 5 years, and every week you try and perfect your business, and then to flip your business back to something that is brand new and that you're making mistakes on every day. Sometimes it's soul destroying. We took deliveries too. We tried to make as much money everywhere where we could, so we did our own deliveries. So the last delivery I had, I realised I was one dessert short, and I was 45 minutes away from the restaurant. And you let the whole meal down, and I just stood there in front of them, and I was just like, I'm so sorry. I'm going to shoot back and go and get it for you. And they were really lovely and very forgiving and understanding. But there's just not a mistake that you would make in your restaurant, and to go back to step one and to make those mistakes was quite tough. It's also with a product that's not your heart and soul. Not to say we weren't giving it our all, but you know what I mean.
Mm. With no indication of when international tourists will return to New Zealand, how do you see the next year playing out for the hospitality sector?
I think that everyone's got to be quite vigilant of what the next year is going to be, and we accept that the next year is going to be like this. It's going to be tough. Auckland's quite tough on its own. We have 3,500 restaurants. New Zealand's been on a high, and I think that Australia was probably similar for the last decade, and there's just so many places that have opened. So in terms of restaurants without tourists, we're spread really thin, and we're all fighting amongst ourselves. So I think that creating a really sharp business plan, and we've made lots of cuts, and instead of basing your restaurant on a 30 packs night where that's your break even, we've had to move it to 18 and make sure that we can do that, because at the end of the day my goal is to keep my staff employed, and we just need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to do that.
You mentioned the move to Europe, which is a couple of weeks away, was driven by family and to be closer to family and having that connection. What's the last year? How has it affected you personally with what's happening?
I think the last year has been, it sounds bizarre, but it's been quite fulfilling. The first time that we went into lockdown, I came face to face with failure. I thought that I'd lost both of the restaurants. And it was something that I've always avoided. And then coming face to face with failure and thinking every avenue down to what would happen if I lost this or lost that, what would it mean? You look up and then you see your family like, you know what, everything's going to be okay. and then I started to make better decisions that weren't ego-driven decisions. And I think that if you're scared of failure, that it's connected a lot to your ego. And we started to make clever, smart decisions and be like, hey, cool, well, we can't put that on the menu if it's not going to be cost effective, or, I think it just opened my eyes to everything business-wise. And once I lost that fear of losing the businesses and failings, everything actually became a lot more successful, and we started doing a lot better.
This experience and change and realisation, do you think that will transfer into the kitchen and the way you cook?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's taken a level of fear away. When you're in the kitchen, you're always thinking, what if a reviewer came in tonight? What if we didn't have this option? What if we didn't have that? Whereas now you just have to be a little bit more practical. Be like, okay, we want to do this. This is our dream. This is what we'd like to deliver to the customer. How are we going to do that in a sustainable way that works for the business and gives them the best experience? And maybe that means that there's a few less options, and I guess there's just less room to hide. I think in hospitality we get caught up in being too hospitable and making too many concessions, which are not always good for your business. I think that it's actually, if anything, it's helped our cooking. It's given us a little bit more structure and direction, and COVID's kind of, it's drawn a box for us, and we can be creative within that box. Instead of just having a blank page and being creative on the page, it's just made our creativity a little bit more focused, if that makes sense.
Tell us about this trip to Europe. Do you have plans to stay there for a couple of years, or are you returning to New Zealand regularly? What's the agenda?
So we only go for the season. This year we are going a little bit earlier so I can try and set the business up. So when the baby comes along, I can spend some time with the new baby and my wife, which has become so important to me. I don't want to be remembered as a great chef in my family. I would like to be remembered as a great dad and husband. So it's forced me to make that balance. So we're aiming to be there until October. The season hopefully kicks off in June, and we're expecting quite a big season in Europe this year. Everyone's been locked down for a very long time. And we think that France has 80 million people in it. So there's a lot of people to support local business there.
With the borders shut for so long and being locked down from the rest of the world for so long, what are you most looking forward to when you get over there?
Well, it's a tough question, but when we get there, it's going to be white asparagus season. We land in Germany, where my wife's family's from, and they've got spargel everywhere, and these kind of 300 to 500 gram pieces of white asparagus that taste like meat.
Wow.
Yeah, they're incredible.
So you're going over for the new season, and you'll be back in New Zealand. Do you have any plans moving forward that you can tell us about?
Back in New Zealand, I guess we're always planning to do new things, and we're always looking to to go that next little level and next little step up. I've got a really successful team at the moment, and a lot of them are looking to do their own things, and I would always like to facilitate that or be part of that if I could. But I guess at the moment we're really just focusing on getting through this year and making sure that everyone is happy, they're employed, their mental health is good. Because we are expecting this year to be as tough as last year, if not tougher, because everyone's carrying the burden from last year. It feels like no one's really had a break from it. And if last week showed us anything, most people, our team worked 30 hours in the week and they arrived on Tuesday and everyone was shattered. It's just the mental strain of COVID and the opening and closing. it's taking a silent toll on everyone.
Do you think that toll will change and transform the hospitality sector moving forward?
I think it is. I think that everyone is talking about it, and I think that the hospitality sector is going to come back maybe energised, restructured. I think that kitchens and restaurants will have to change, and the way that we cook and the hours that we work. I think that menus will have to be adapted to suit a more balanced lifestyle, which is naturally happening, and it has been happening over the last few years. But I think it's really going to be apparent in the next little while. The time off that people have had, they've really realised, hey, I'm spending a lot of time at work, and my family is neglected. And I think everyone came out of the first lockdown talking about a balance, and we went straight back into it, and you kind of forgot about it. And in the second lockdown, you're like, hey, there's that balance we were talking about again. So I think it's really being drummed into us that something needs to happen, and I think that things will change quite quickly.
Well, Nick, you're about to head off to Europe. Good luck with the summer season over there. I'm sure you're very excited to get on a plane for the first time, like many of us will when we get to travel again. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today, mate. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.